This is the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning, no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the special operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is produced in partnership with Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm focused on helping you optimize the people side of your business. We're sponsored by Jersey Mike's Subs. Together, we share the mission of giving, making a difference in someone's life. Visit the Jedburgh podcast, Talent War Group, and Jersey Mike's Subs on the web and on social media. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. The Jedburgh podcast turns 1 year old. Welcome to episode 50, where we traveled to snowy Denver and sat down once again with author and journalist Cleo Stiller. Cleo joined us on episode 7, where we talked about her then recently released book, Modern Manhood. Conversations about the complicated world of being a good man today. Cleo's work has impacted both men and women. It's shown us the importance of our relationships and our attitudes towards each other in both our personal and professional lives. To celebrate our birthday, I thought we'd bring back the guest of our top performing episode to reminisce about our Jedburgh journey, highlight some important moments over the last year, and preview what's coming in 2022. But for this conversation, we couldn't let a good opportunity pass us by. So Cleo turns the table and puts me in the hot seat. She took control of the Jedburgh podcast and pushed me to tell my story, from my days growing up in New England and Florida to Boston University and the Army. We cover what drove me to study journalism, why rowing was so impactful in my life, why I joined the Army, and what I actually did in the Special Forces. We also talk about my post-Army career, the highs of business school and running around New York City, the lows of some difficult lessons learned in corporate America, my path to finding myself personally, controlling my emotions, and getting back to the person I always wanted to be as a father and a husband. The Jedburgh podcast has changed my life. It's allowed me to pursue my dream and my passion to tell impactful stories that I can only hope in some small way bring us closer to the best versions of ourselves. Thank you to all our listeners, our guests, and our sponsors, and especially the Jedburgh podcast team for joining me on this journey. We're 1 year old with this episode. Now let's celebrate and then get back to work on the next 50. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow. Cleo, thanks for coming again on the Jedburgh podcast.
I am so happy to be here.
This is a special episode because it is our 1 year anniversary episode. It's number 50. So we have been relatively nonstop since we kicked this thing off, and we started recording with your episode. We recorded really early on. That was episode 7, and we recorded it March 12th of last year. We started recording in like January or February, and then the first episode went out, I think it was like the 14th or the 16th of March. And we have been going nonstop since. And I always told myself that when we did the 1 year episode, I was going to take the guest from our top performing episode and bring them back on. And I figured we're going to do this whole thing. We're going to talk about all the different episodes and do a recap. But then I realized that you have been the top episode since the day you released.
Thank you to everyone who listened. Appreciate it.
And that was episode 7. And so really what that means is that as we've added all of these other episodes, because today we're recording, but we released episode 48. So we've had now 41 episodes have released after yours. And yours continues to rise as these others come in. We gain new listeners, and yours continues to go up. And some have tried, but none have yet to surpass it. And so congratulations on that.
Well, keep coming for me.
So yeah, Modern Manhood was an awesome book, and we talked so much about it. And I think it was just a great opportunity to hear your story, and it helped me too. Like when we talked about in that episode, so many things that I've gone through in my past. And when I thought about that episode, and I thought about bringing you back on, then I said, wait, she is also an author. She's also a journalist and a really good interviewer. And I said, this is the perfect 50th episode, first year anniversary, and we're going to flip the tables on this thing. And instead of us and me talking to you about all of the episodes we've done, I'm giving you control. And you have to sit here and interview me, talk about so many different things that you've prepared. And I'm going to tell you that I have a lot of people on the show, and they all at some point look at me kind of nervous. Now I'm nervous.
Yes, well, I am back in the chair where I feel most comfortable. So I'm really thrilled to be here. And, obviously for longtime listeners, they learned about you, Fran, the host, in bits and pieces. You always reveal a little bit of your history or a little bit of your perspective on another guest experience. But we've never gotten the whole picture. Who is the host and creator of the Jedburgh podcast? So I felt like, well, gosh, I'm curious. I'm sure everyone else is as well. So we'll do that here today. And I kind of just want to start from the beginning.
Okay. I always stop myself, when I start going into some things about me, because I get so much feedback. As you know, right? You've read a book, you're on TV, and people give you all sorts of solicited and unsolicited feedback. And your episode was really funny because I had people contact me after your episode and they said things like, "You talk too much. I wanted to hear more from her. It was too short." And it was like an hour and 13 minutes. I was looking at it last night. And then a little while later, I got some more feedback, and it was, "You didn't talk enough. We wanted to hear more about you. Your episode was too long. You talked too much." And then I'm like, okay, I don't know what you people want, because that's the cool thing about podcasting, is that you get to exert your own kind of influence, but in so many ways, you kind of get to see where these conversations go.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very true. The more you listen, the more you'll hear all kinds of perspectives. So I think for today, let's just say that the exercise and the point of the episode is really to learn about our host and get a little bit of, you've done 50 interviews now with some of the world's leading innovators, leading leaders from all different sorts of industries. And I think, gosh, what an opportunity for you. You must have learned so much. So I kind of want to, we're going to dive into the most important takeaways for our guests. So actually, if you ever listen to one episode of the Jedburgh podcast, this is it.
This is the one. This is the recap. I learn more from every one of these episodes, every single episode that we have. And people ask me all the time, I don't know if you will, but I will say now that I don't have a favorite episode because they're so different and they're so diverse. And we've talked to so many different leaders, as you said, from whether they're journalists or they're social activists or they're athletes, Olympians, professional athletes, military leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, heads of major corporations and businesses. Every time I leave one of these conversations, I feel like I am better because of that conversation, and I take so much away. And I'm so grateful for every one of the guests that we've had on.
Well, I'm grateful to the guests too. And I also want to invite the listeners, as you're listening to this, if you have a strong feeling about one of the episodes that was your favorite, make sure you write into us on social. We're on all the handles.
Oh, I love it.
We definitely want to hear from y'all. So let's just dive in. Okay.
All right.
Who is Fran? Where did you get your start?
So I was born in Rhode Island. I grew up between Rhode Island and Florida. We moved there a couple of times as a kid. We were just talking about before we started that I lived in Miami for a while. I can't wait to go back. So Harris Glazer from episode 38 of Midnight Express. I'm coming one day. But I loved it. And then I moved to Boston in middle school. Grew up middle school, high school in Boston, right outside the city in a town called Weston. And then I went to Boston University. And at Boston University, I wanted to be a journalist. That was my passion in life. And I saw people like Peter Jennings, Tom Brokaw. It was really before journalism started to go a little bit more subjective, and we could have a whole episode on subjectivity versus objectivity in journalism. But you didn't really have people pontificating thoughts that much. And this was 1999 to 2003. And during that time, we saw a massive shift in journalism, actually. And we saw it go from the nightly news, where you had these staples who I idolized, and the war started in Afghanistan. And then subsequently in 2003, in my senior year, we went into Iraq. And as a student of journalism in that time, what you saw was what was called embedded journalism. And so if you go back to 1991 in the Gulf War, that was the first CNN war, they called it, because it was televised somewhat, not really in real time, but sort of by satellite. In 2001 and in 2003, the journalists were on the front lines. And we always had journalists on the front lines, even back to World War I. Civil War had journalists on the front lines, but it wasn't broadcast in real time. Mm-hmm. And with the advancement of technology, you had it broadcast in real time. So now I saw this and I said, wait a second. There are these guys with beards and long hair. They're riding horses through the deserts and mountains of Afghanistan. And in my mind, they were saving the world. Mm-hmm. And that was 9/11. I say all the time, and I've said on a bunch of episodes, after 9/11, as you know, it didn't matter who you were, but someone had to get their ass kicked. Mm-hmm. And that was America's goal. Mm-hmm. And I jumped onto that. And at first, I said, I'm going to be a war correspondent, because then I'll be with these guys. Mm-hmm. And then I watched it for a couple of years, and I said, hell no. I don't want to be a war correspondent. I actually want to be one of those people. I can make an impact there now. And then later on, if I want to be a journalist, I can be a journalist. And the defining moment for me was Geraldo Rivera. And one day I hope I can interview Geraldo Rivera. I got to find him. I'm sure I have a path to him, but Geraldo Rivera was either in Iraq or Afghanistan. He was with an infantry squad from the Marines or the Army, I don't remember. They got into a firefight, so they got shot at. And he pulled out a pistol. Geraldo pulled out a pistol, and he started running down the road, and he fell down, and he lost the pistol, and all these guys are yelling at him, and they're like, you idiot! Why do you have a gun? You're a reporter. And I looked at that, and I said, that's it. I'm done. Yeah. Next day, I got in the car. I drove down to Quincy, Mass, south of Boston, went into the recruiter station, and I was like, I want to join the Army and be a Green Beret in the Special Forces.
That's the story.
That's the story.
So journalism sort of got you there, and then you saw Geraldo do what no journalist should ever try to do. and then that was it.
That was it.
Wow. Okay, so you enlisted, and tell us a little bit about your experience as a Green Beret.
Yeah, so I went into the Army right after I graduated in May 2003 from BU, and I was on the men's rowing team for 4 years, so didn't do ROTC, so I applied to Officer Candidate School. Okay. Got into Officer Candidate School, and then I became an infantry officer, because you have to, as an officer, you have to do time in the regular Army before you can go to selection for Special Forces. So I did about 3 years in 4th Infantry Division. Right here, I should caveat that for those watching on YouTube, right? And if you can hear in the background, you have kindly invited us to your condo in downtown Denver. Yes. But this was home for me for a very long time. For 12 and a half years, we lived down in Castle Rock, and then eventually I lived in Colorado Springs for a short time. But so this is like coming home to be able to do this. And I was in 4th Infantry Division. I went to Iraq for a year as an infantry platoon leader in 2005, 2006. And then when I got back, my window opened for selection to be a Green Beret. And I went to selection and was thankfully selected. And then went to the Special Forces qualification course subsequently and shortly after that.
And tell me about that experience.
Oh, that's something I talk about a lot.
Yeah. Come on.
It's funny. I was on a podcast this morning, and we were talking about it, and I said, it's one of the most challenging things mentally and physically that you can ever do. But I will say that I was prepared for that because of my time at BU rowing. Because I give a lot of credit.
Okay, I just have to say, no one can see my face, but I did not expect you to say that. Tell me what about rowing at BU prepared you for that experience?
There were some terrible days in selection. Okay. Where you're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, you haven't slept. I mean, you're constantly going through physical and mental evaluations, and the pressure to make it is severe and significant. The pressure you put on yourself, the pressure that you feel, whether it's there or not, from others and from peers when you look around. And even in the most darkest moments, when I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, I would say to myself, at least I'm not on the erg rowing right now, which was crazy, right? But it's true, because rowing it is a sport, and there are so many successful people that come out of all college athletics. A lot of successful people come out of college athletics, but rowing produces actually an interesting number and correlation between success in the business world and actually in rowing, because the discipline that's required. you're up at 5:30 in the morning. You're rowing within 30 minutes of waking up. It's cold in Boston. We make fun of the guys out in California who are rowing, and it's like they're like, oh, it's cold. Like, no, dude, it's like 65 over here. Like, try going out at 30, right? And it's dark out because it's November. And it instills in you a sense of discipline. And there's also a sense of teamwork. There's an individual piece that is required of you, and then there's a sense of the team. And nothing is accomplished individually, even if you're a single sculler. And we interviewed, I think in a previous episode, I think it was 33. It's eluding me now, but Jevy Stone. Jevy Stone is a silver medalist in the Olympics in women's rowing. She's the all-time winningest in the women's champ single at the head of the Charles. Phenomenal story. I was so impressed by her. But this is a woman who for decades has led everybody in this sport. And people don't realize the toll that it takes mentally and physically on your body to perform at that level, because nothing else can take your body from resting heart rate to lactic acid shutdown that quickly.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that either.
There's
So hot tip for folks who really want to succeed in the business world. Yes, didn't know that. Okay, great. So from rowing to infantry?
Yeah, so a couple of years in the infantry, went to selection, and then after that, I was fortunate enough to come back to Colorado and be in 10th Special Forces Group. So the Legion is what we call it, the originals, the first unit of U.S. Special Forces. We'll talk about the podcast that I know, but the lineage back to the Jedburghs and 10th Special Forces Group. I was in 2nd Battalion, and then I was at the group headquarters, and I had just an amazing opportunity. I spent 3 years as a Special Forces detachment commander in charge of 12 Special Forces operators. We went back to Iraq 2 more times. We did a number of exchanges with some Middle Eastern and European partners, and after that I was spent some time at the staff level. I went to Africa for 6 months. I spent the better part of 2 years working in and around Africa. But first I was in Djibouti, Africa, nestled between between Somalia and Ethiopia, and I had a really, really cool job. And special shout out to my battalion commander and my operations officer, who still in, so I'm not going to mention names, but Don Red was my battalion commander, and he's out now, so I'll mention his name, but the other guys are still in, and just empowered me to go out, and their guidance to me was have an effect on the environment. I'm like, I don't know what that means. What do you mean have an effect on the environment? And they're like, we need you to go to the African nations in East Africa, and we need you to figure out different subsets of their military that can be trained as special operations capable. Meaning that the U.S. government, the U.S. Special Operations is going to go to these countries, find a group that they can train, give them money, give them equipment, give them training, and then deploy them to go combat Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa, and then subsequently I was able to do that same job in West Africa and against Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda. And really amazing opportunity as a young officer to go throughout Africa and meet with ambassadors and high-level dignitaries in the U.S. side and in the foreign nation side, and really start to build capability in Africa to combat global terrorism. And it was I think about it all the time. People are like, would you go back? I'd go back to Africa in 2 seconds.
Would you?
I would.
Okay, so let me pause here because I don't want to rush through this. What you're describing is an experience that not many people have, and I just want to kind of freeze frame for that time period. When you zoom out a little bit, you have years now, you look back, what is the most important lesson that you learned during that time? And were you aware of it as it was happening, or has it sort of taken life experience afterwards to really glean it?
I think that I was aware of it, but not...
First you have to say what the lesson was. Like, what did you really... I mean, there's so much you can learn from all of that, right? But
you learn perspective.
Okay.
I think you really take away perspective. You take away the fact that the rest of the world doesn't look and operate like the U.S.
Yes.
And that we're really fortunate here in America to be able to say and do all the things that we get to do. And other countries, they don't operate like that. Other countries that we even are close with in Europe don't operate the same way that we do. I mean, look at what's happening right now with Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so it's easy as an American and even living here in the U.S. to take for granted what the opportunities are that sit in front of us. And when you go to foreign nations, especially in places like Africa, where there is such a difference, it's not like going to London or Berlin, right? These places are so different, and that you look back and you say, wow, like what we have isn't all that bad.
Did it change you as a man?
I think it does. I think it absolutely does. I mean, I think in some ways you see how men act in other nations and how they treat women, and the real big difference between men and women in other countries and in other cultures, that you come to appreciate the equality that we have here.
Yes.
As from Modern Manhood.
Okay, great. So to continue on, after you served, how did you decide you weren't going to stay in service, first of all?
So my wife, I think you and I talked about this a little bit, but I was not the best man, and my wife and I fell apart for, I was gone a tremendous amount of time during my time in, and eventually we split and kind of went our separate ways for a good period of time, about 7 years. We spent apart from each other, and she went to New York, and I kind of had a decision to make. We had a 4-year-old daughter at the time. Our daughter, she's 12 now, and I had to say, do I want to get out and go and be with them and try to be a father, or do I want to continue my career, and what are my choices here if I stay in, and what does that look like? And ultimately it was a matter of having to get out and go try to resolve that and try to be a dad more than anything else at that point in time.
Is this the first time you've said that on this podcast?
On this podcast, yeah.
Oh, wow.
For sure.
I just have to say, having authored Modern Manhood, when I listen to a lot of the interviews that you do, there's so much, this podcast is about so much professional facing experiences, but doing the work that I do and having spoken to men like I do, I always wonder about what's happening on the other side, the personal side, and we as a culture really tend to divorce the two, so it's so much more comfortable to talk about what's happening professionally for us, and especially in terms of, you can even say, like, I was in Africa, sandwiched between Somalia and another nation, and we can all infer how terrifying and exhilarating and what went into that experience, but it's probably more uncomfortable, right, to talk about what was happening for you on a personal level.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
So, anyway, thank you for opening up about that. So you decided to put your relationship first with your daughter.
With my daughter, yeah. Yeah, and so I moved so I went to New York, and I applied to a lot of jobs. When I was getting out, I had a lot of rejection.
Which you were not used to, I feel like.
Certainly wasn't used to. And I think it's interesting because you spend this time in this organization, and we, in special operations, it's always like, no, nothing is you can do anything. And even if you don't know how to do it, the attitude is always, well, just tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
Yes.
Whatever it takes, we're going to make it happen. And then all of a sudden you transition into the corporate world, in the private sector, and all of a sudden people are like, well, have you done this before? You're like, no. Well, you need to know.
Experience. It's called experience.
What are you talking about? I'll figure it out. Like, just give me some time, give me a chance. Hire a veteran. Like, we'll figure it out. Which I do actually believe that veterans can figure out a lot of stuff when given the opportunity. We talk about it all the time. Hire for character, train for skill. Don't overweight someone's experience on one or two certain things. If you can train them and do technical skills, hire the right person because they bring these kind of soft skills to the table. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of jobs out there that you have to have some baseline knowledge of business. And I was applying to, Google and Facebook and all these big time, consulting firms, the big four. And I was like, I don't know, like I'll just put me in an advisory role. And they say, well, how are you going to go consult a client if you don't know anything about finance or balance sheets? And I'm like, what's a balance sheet?
Oh my God.
and they're like, yeah, you're going to need to go to business school. And so then I thought to myself, well, the military does a really good job of every time you get promoted, every time you go to a different role, they send you to school. And they give you a baseline set of kind of academic training. And the regular world, it's kind of like that too. And I approached it in that with that mindset, that if I'm going to take this next step in my life and in my career, that in order to close the gap with my peers who now have, in the private sector, 12, 13 years lead on me, I've got to do something that's going to give me some baseline knowledge of business. And so I applied to NYU and fortunately to Stern, and I got in. Very funny story there. I missed their application deadline, and for the semester that started we started in August 2015, and it was a couple months before, maybe June or something. And I was looking it up, and I said, well, I want to go this fall. And so I called them up, and I called the office, and I said, listen, I'm really sorry I missed your application deadline, but my name is Fran Racioppi, I'm a Green Beret, and I went, and I didn't give her a chance to talk. And I went on for about 2 minutes, and I just ended it with, I'd really appreciate the opportunity if I could submit my application. And there was silence on the other end for about 5 or 10 seconds, and she said, yeah, go ahead and fill out the online application. And I said, well, I already did. and so she gave me the list of questions and the kind of the short essays I had to answer. And I think I was in about 2 weeks. And the normal class size for the program I was in was 60. We had 61.
Okay,
in my class.
and you were the...
I think I was the one.
Okay.
But really appreciative to NYU for that opportunity. And I just had some great experiences there for the couple of years that I was there.
So it's interesting to me, especially as a journalist, I have to say, I remember that where we started here was you were thinking about doing journalism. You saw Geraldo trip, that no longer looked so good to you, and then you went to war for our nation, so thank you. But then you came back and you didn't circle back to being a journalist. You were like, I'm done with that. I'm going to business school.
That was the plan, and actually I had a great opportunity from a very, very close friend now, and he was my business partner, and that he hired me and had me work for him, but it always was great to call us partners, and I'm like, no, I work for you. But a guy named Rick Nelson, and Rick Nelson was, he works at Merrill Lynch and runs a financial advisory team at Merrill Lynch, and he ascribed by that, before I even really got into official kind of performance and leadership development, he exudes that hire for character, train for skill. And he reached out to me on LinkedIn when I was kind of like down to the wire on what was I going to do for a job, and I was about to start school. And he said, I want you to come on and join my team. We'll train you in everything that you need. I just want people of high character who have a demonstrated pattern of, he said, you have a demonstrated pattern of success in their career, and we'll teach you how to be a financial advisor. And I said, all right, let's do it.
That's while you're doing.
While I was in business school.
Wow. Okay. Executive track, like at
I did. I was in the executive MBA.
Yeah.
Program. Okay. So the cool thing about NYU was that it was every other weekend for 2 days, and then based on the amount of credits and time, the degrees are the same as the full time. So it's something I always tell. So anyone who's looking to get an executive MBA, I always tell them, make sure your degree is the exact same degree as the full time.
Yes.
Because you got to make sure you get all the right classes and instruction.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about MBAs also for journalists for J school as well. Okay, so Merrill Lynch. This reminds me of an episode where you talk to Peter of Jersey Mike's Subs.
Oh, Peter Cancro.
I have to...
Our sponsor. I have to throw, before you go into it, I have to thank Peter, and I have to thank Jersey Mike's. They are our title sponsor. for all of 2022 and hopefully for beyond. But Peter was our second, was episode number 2, our first kind of official episode outside of the podcast and the talent war group, and couldn't be more thankful to have spent time with Peter and become close to him over the years. And get out to Jersey Mike's and tell him the Jedburgh podcast sang it.
I just have a little behind the scenes information. So when Fran asked me to co-host this, obviously we said, all right, well, I need to listen to some of the most popular episodes besides my own. And Jersey Mike's sub episode, I think, is the 3rd best perform. It's certainly in the top 5. So I thought to myself, okay, so also for everyone, right? Obviously now I'm a culture reporter. I wrote Modern Manhood and I hosted a show about health for Univision prior to that. But I cut my teeth at Bloomberg, covering financial markets. And so, I'd certainly done like a lot of small business stories as a baby reporter. And I thought, oh, how interesting is the story going to be of Jersey Mike's subs, really? But man, is a sandwich tale interesting, I will say. Yeah. So you're interviewing Peter of Jersey Mike subs, and it's revealed that this was a franchise, a company that had existed prior to him, and he had worked there as a sandwich boy since he was 14.
Yeah, this is the only job he's ever held. That's what he said.
Holy moly. And so then at 17, he finds out that the owner is going to sell the store he's been working at. And so this 17-year-old kid, also, though, he kind of undersold himself. He was the president of his class. So he was like the captain of the football team. Yeah, captain of not just any kid, but still. He gets people in his community to loan him money. He buys the sandwich shop and eventually becomes the sort of sandwich mogul.
Yeah, $2 billion company now.
Yeah, okay, $2 billion, right?
Yeah, over $2 billion. They're pushing to 3. They're pushing to 3 now. This year they want to push to 3.
So where that comes into play with Merrill Lynch is, I think you met him. You were at Merrill, and he says to you, we're at $1 billion now, but we haven't hit our growth yet. In the next 5 years, we're going to be a $2 billion company. And you say something that made me laugh out loud. You were like, well, now I'm thinking, because I'm an MBA student, so I know everything about business. He's never going to hit that mark. And I just laughed because you do have a lot of chutzpah in general, but I love that you are thinking in your first year as an executive MBA student, like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And he did. He did. So you're at Merrill. Anyway, I just had to interject that. That's like one of my laughing spots. But you're at Merrill and you meet him. Who else did you meet at Merrill? Like, what did you learn while you were there?
I learned a lot about. I learned a lot about finance. I learned a lot about financial markets. I learned a lot about. We talk about grit in a lot of episodes. Yeah. This year specifically, and people who listen to every episode are probably tired of me, talking about grit this year. But like, I'll tell you, like that is a job that takes daily grit to bounce back from rejection. It's a tough business in financial advisory, and it was tough for me. It was, at that point I was late 30s, and I'm in business school, and I spent all this time in the military, and now you're sitting in front of someone trying to convince them that you have the experience and know-how to manage their retirement and manage their money. And coming back to kind of when I was saying that when I was getting out of the army, like there's certain things you can't fake. Yes.
Bernie Madoff would argue otherwise, but you are not that. So was this prior to the crash? Or
this was 2015, 16, 17.
Oh, so after.
Way
after. Okay.
Yeah, so it was tough because you're trying to develop business and you're trying to bring people in, you're trying to grow your own portfolio of clients, but at the same time, it's very difficult to fake that. You know exactly what you're talking about. Although Merrill Lynch, great company. Yeah. If not the world's leading investment firm, and they've continued to prove that. So I couldn't have been more thankful to go to a company like that and learn from some of the best in the industry. Also learning that it wasn't for me.
Okay, I was going to say, and yet you're not still there.
No, I learned it wasn't for me, and that was a tough conversation with Rick because we had become very good friends. He had really been so supportive of me and done absolutely everything. And the day I had to go in and tell him that I was going to be leaving was a really, really difficult day. but he, the utmost professional, and friend. People say, I think it was Craig Weldon said in one of our previous episodes, Craig Weldon was a 2-star general in the Army. And he said, people's character is tested when they're pressured. And here I was, telling Rick that his growth plan for his business was me, and I couldn't do it for really the reason that I just didn't enjoy it.
You just didn't enjoy it.
And it wasn't that the opportunity wasn't there, and it wasn't that I didn't see necessarily a path. I just didn't wake up every day with the conviction that I felt I needed to continue. And so that was difficult. But you talk about true friends and men of character who say, hey, look, I get it, and I'm going to support you in whatever you need, even if it's not with me. And that's what he's done to this day. And I'll tell you that he's been instrumental in a lot of things that I've done, including continuing the relationship with Jersey Mike's. So that came from Rick. So thanks, Rick.
Jersey Mike's had no idea they were going to get such a plug in this episode today. Okay, well, I just want to point out to you, it's interesting, you're saying you just didn't wake up enjoying what you did every day. For someone who fought in a war, I feel like that's an interesting benchmark to have in your civilian life. Is that something that you feel like you sacrificed so much prior, so now if you're not enjoying what you're doing on a day-to-day, you're out?
I think, I would tell you that when you're in the service, you really probably do enjoy it. I mean, if you don't, you get out.
Yeah.
And you have you have times to get out. I mean, you get out as an officer after the first 2 or 3 years. You can get out subsequently after that, almost at any time. And on the enlisted side, you kind of have different contracts that take you through the first 10 or 12 years of your career, and then you become indefinite where you can leave. And you wouldn't stay if you didn't enjoy what you were doing. And there are a lot of things in the military that are hard. And there's a lot of things that are difficult. And you wake up in the day and you're like, this is stupid. Why do I have to do it? But at the end of the day, you enjoy what you're doing. I mean, my job was to go around the world, develop foreign armies, work with some of the greatest, most competent people on the face of the earth, and who sat next to me every day. We jumped out of airplanes, we rappelled out of helicopters. I got paid to become a ski instructor and an avalanche expert and climb the mountains. And you have to enjoy that.
Yes.
And when you get out, you lose a big piece of you. And it's something we talk about a lot in our veteran episodes.
Yeah.
We talked about it with General McChrystal, we talked about it with General Hutmacher, we spoke about it with General Weldon, Chris Free is another one we spoke about it with. But and also Special Operations Association of America and Dan Elkins we had on. But you lose this sense of team and this sense of camaraderie. And when you walk out of the base for the last time, I think I've said it before, but I cried when I was in the car, and I looked in the rearview mirror, and I realized everything I know in life is behind me, and I'm leaving it, and I don't have any friends, because the friends I had when I was in college, because that's the last thing, your reference point is when you graduate college, for me at least, I don't talk to them as much as I used to. And my friends were the guys that I served with. And that was everything I knew. And so your identity in so many ways is lost. And athletes deal with this too. We're going to have, I'll tell her, but she knows she's coming on because we talked about it. We have to set a date. But sometime this summer we're going to have on an athlete, Morgan Aratola. And Morgan Aratola was on the U.S. cross-country ski team.
Okay.
And competed in the Olympics a couple of times. And that's what our episode is going to talk about, is her journey and how we speak so often about military losing their sense of purpose when they leave the military, but athletes go through the same thing. And the struggles that she had and mental health challenges, and what's driven her to be a counselor now and study to be a professional counselor, because that loss of identity can come from anything that you do when you've invested your entire self in that.
Yeah.
And that's a big piece of what you lose. And so, do you wake up and then kind of flip a switch and say, well, now I'm not going to do the things that I don't want to do? No, I don't think so. I think you still do that, especially if you come from the military, because it's actually harder to flip that switch and say, I don't have to do this thing that I'm doing right now.
Yes.
You seize opportunities, you take them, you look for the good in them, which is something I think I did, in the other jobs I've held since. And that can often take you further than you should have actually gone.
Yes.
Or take and go after opportunities that may otherwise have a series of red flags. And you say, well, I can still see the good in it, I'm going to go. And I'll say that it's probably been only in the last year since I started this podcast where I've really started to understand true what Kristen Holmes from Whoop calls self-efficacy. You have a choice. You have a choice to perform. You have a choice in your life. Shelley Paxton was on, former CMO of Harley Davidson, wrote Soldatical, and I read Soldatical, and I was like, she's out of her mind. You can't just do that. And then I talked to her because I read it in preparation, and then I was completely shifted the other way after I talked to her. I'm like, she's right. Like at some point, maybe you can't, hop up and leave everything behind and travel the world for a couple of years and not have to have a job, but that's okay. But you can still wake up and say, look, I'm not happy where I am.
Yes.
And I don't have to do this. And I think I've had a number of episodes where we've spoken about that, and we've spoken with people who are truly pursuing their dreams and their passions. And when you see that in someone, it's hard. I said I learned more from these than I could ever imagine, but you see that in these people week after week, and you look and you say, why can't I pursue it?
It's contagious.
It is.
It is contagious.
And that's all you want to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good point to pick back up again. So you leave Merrill, and I know you had a series of roles. I do want to link us back to journalism in the podcast. So kind of give us the highlight reel. Yeah, the highlight reel. Yeah. Hard lessons learned. Hard lessons learned. We talk about something in special operations called understand your operational environment. It's the number one rule, they say. Understand your operational environment. So what's going on around you? We, like I said, we tend to see the good coming out of special forces. We tend to see opportunity. We tend to look at everything as a challenge and say, how can I approach it? And sometimes we try too hard. And we try to do too much. You try to jam. I had a mentor of mine tell me, you can't jam everything down someone's throat. You gotta take time. You gotta be willing to accept loss sometimes, and that's something that I wasn't good at in some of my roles, and came at odds with some, and unfortunately, that's what happens. You live and learn, and you find new opportunities. Okay. I have to, thank you for sharing. I have to link this back now because I'm curious about what was happening personally for you during this time. So you mentioned that you left the service to, become a father, be a father, improve your relationship with your daughter. I think it would be dishonest of me as a journalist, since this is what I asked about. I told you put me in the hot seat. Yeah, I know. We did not talk about this when I did the rundown for him. Left it out. So, what was happening on a personal level? Yeah, I talked about when you go into the military, especially for me, where I did after college, your life kind of in some ways had two phases. And so when I got out, I was searching for opportunities. And I went to New York with what I feel was the right goal of being near my daughter, trying to be a dad. We had separate apartments, both in Manhattan, so in retrospect, quite expensive. I was going to say not cheap, and probably a waste of money. But but I pursued experiences, and I pursued what is it like to live your life on your own terms, because I had never had that, and so going to business school, being in New York by myself, afforded me that opportunity.
and I had relationships,
Yeah.
and I didn't live the life that I always kind of aspired to.
Yeah. And
it took some hard loss,
Yeah.
And some hard lessons that I talked about. And one of my time at Snout, proved that to me, and some selfishness, and I'll say a lot of selfishness, and a lot of selfishness that hurt a lot of people. And one of the things that going through those experiences and be able to look back on now and say, did I learn a lot from them? Am I, in ways thankful that I went through those opportunities? Yeah, because you're going to grow up and you need sometimes to learn the hard way. You have to actually experience. No one can tell you, what it's like to be, in New York, to live in New York for the first time by yourself and do all these things you saw on TV. But then you look back and you're like, well, did I have to, hurt everybody that I did, and people that I cared about, and that's hard to reconcile. And so what I've kind of done, along my path is say, what's important to me now, and I can't make up for mistakes of the past, but as you've kind of talked about in Modern Manhood, and I think Modern Manhood really helped me truly to come to grips with a lot of that stuff and say, I think we talked about it. I forget what the quote is in the book, but it's, you can say that it's okay that I was shitty.
Yes.
Yes. And was I right? No. At the time, did I think I was? Yes. But, am I sorry? Yeah, in a lot of ways I am. But it's okay to sit here and say that there was a period of my life where I was a pretty shitty person. And have I now, can I learn from that and change? And yeah, I do believe that you can, and I do believe that in a lot of ways I have.
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about this in the context of your podcast because, so like I've said, so many of your conversations are so professional facing, and it's really out of alignment when you act one way professionally, and like you said, in the military, for example, but even on teams in general, in professional settings, you really think of yourself as often as like extended family. When you perform in one way and you show up as a person in one way in that realm, but then in another way in your life, it does not mirror that. It's not in integrity and, in the honor of the Jedburghs.
Yeah.
And I think when I've been speaking with men, it's sort of viewing discipline, integrity, resilience as a sort of holistic experience in your life. So what comes to mind actually is this book by Todd Herman called, I think it's called Alter Ego. Have you read this?
I haven't.
Okay. I think about it a lot because Todd Herman speaks with real, it's kind of similar format to your podcast, except it's a book. Actually, I remember that Dr. Dre picked it up and put a photo of it on social media, and I was like, oh shit, okay, it's a really big deal now. So Todd Herman spent a lot of time with professional athletes, like Tim Ferriss types, Elon Musk, I believe, and looked at what made these people so successful. And his theory, newsflash based on the title, you can probably guess, is that actually what very highly successful people tend to do is develop an alter ego. So they show up in one way on the football field. He was talking to one football player who was saying how, when I'm on the field, I'm another person, like, you do not want to get in my way, I will tear you apart. Yeah. And he's like, that's my alter ego. But what I know from reporting Modern Manhood is actually, the longer you have an alter ego, the more difficult it becomes to keep these two separate. And it starts to infiltrate the rest of your life. So I'm so interested always when I'm listening to your episodes, where is the integrity showing up holistically in your life? Right. So thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that another term you can use for that is compartmentalization.
Yes.
And I think that you can take compartmentalization too far. And I think that's always it's always what I used in my mind to justify behavior. Yeah. And I would say, well, I put it in this box and it lives in this box and it doesn't there, so basically it doesn't exist, right? If I don't, if it doesn't come out of that box, and that's not reality. Yeah. Because at some point, it all comes to an end.
And this is what you learn if you are a journalist. It never stays hidden. Yeah. It really never stays hidden. I've worked with some of the biggest people that we've heard have, fallen in recent years due to comeuppance and in the wake of Me Too. So big lesson is it never stays hidden. Yeah. Okay, so circling back to journalism, the podcast. You did time at Snap. So basically, you're on this proven business track. You're very successful. You've somehow managed, not somehow, it's very clear, you've managed to make this transition from top serviceman to now a highly desired consultant. Why the Jedburgh podcast?
Well, I care about impact.
Yeah.
And when COVID, I don't think I started the podcast because of COVID. I kind of started during COVID. But I really had an opportunity to work with the organization, one of our sponsors, one of our partners in the start of this thing, the Talent War, and started by Mike Sorelli, George Randall, and they wrote the book called The Talent War. Mm-hmm. And the Talent War took these 9 characteristics of soft performance. Mike was a Navy SEAL, George was in the Army, and they started to apply them to anybody. How do you build elite organizations using this framework that Special Operations uses? And I was introduced to Mike shortly before they released the book, and he invited me to be part of kind of founding members of this Talent War group, which would then be able to go out and speak from experience about building elite teams and elite organizations under the framework of these characteristics. And we launched that in I think it was now November 2020. And we did a series of LinkedIn Live sessions right around the launch. And they said, who wants to be a part of it? And obviously I was like, I want to go on LinkedIn Live. That sounds cool. And I can talk about leadership and all these things I care about. Because I've been doing public speaking and I've been doing keynote addresses and leadership development work with different organizations since I've gotten out on the side. And we started doing these LinkedIn Live sessions, and I said, man, this reminds me of when I was at BU, and I really like talking to people, and I've always wanted to be able to try to figure out how do I do that for my career, and I got away from it, and so I went to Mike and I said, what happens if we start a podcast? I want to call it the Jedburgh Podcast. We're going to talk to visionaries, drivers of change, leaders in a variety of different industries who have a sole dedication to winning, and what I call no matter the cost. And Mike said, yeah, we're in, let's do it together. And so we launched this thing, and the last year has been really, truly a blessing, as I talked about it. And we've been able to speak with so many different people, but it comes back to creating impact for anyone. And we've taken the long game approach on this podcast. And there's one school of thought that says that we can pick one theme, or we pick one thing, one topic, and talk about it. It could be sports, it could be the military, and the only thing we're going to talk about is that. And we're going to gain a decent sized audience, but that audience is going to have a certain size.
Yes.
Or we can take a broader theme, like performance, leadership, human performance, and we can talk to people in a variety of different industries. And so it doesn't become about episode 5, 10, 20, 50, but it really becomes about episode 100, 200, 300, when we have a vast body of work where we've taken a core central theme and we have told stories of impact through the lens of our guest, that a listener can come into the podcast and say, I don't like all 200 episodes. I mean, look at Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan. These guys have 600 episodes, 700 episodes. We're at 50, right? We're at the front end of this thing. But nobody likes every episode.
Right.
But you can go to Tim Ferriss and you can say, well, I like 50 of these episodes.
Yeah.
And the amount of people who like 50 episodes is huge.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a massive following behind that because the message is consistent in every one. And the theories that he uses are consistent, but he speaks to so many different people from so many different walks of life. So it's super appealing to a lot of different folks. And that's the approach we've taken on it.
That begs the question. Well, first I want to just say, I'm going to ask you what's coming next.
Okay.
Like, what can we look forward to? But I just want to also say that the listeners, Fran will listen to you and definitely cares. What are some of the episodes that have really resonated for you, and what do you all want to hear from the podcast in the coming year? But in the meantime now, what can we expect?
Well, what we can expect is we're doing a couple of events, actually.
Cool.
Which is pretty cool, and I'm really excited about it. So we're gonna start talking about it here in the next couple of weeks. So right after this releases, but I'll announce it here. So the first look, we are partnering with an organization called GoRuck. GoRuck is founded by another former 10th Special Forces veteran, Jason McCarthy, and they are hosting a fitness event, a festival in Jacksonville, April 21st to 23rd, or 22nd to 24th, I think, whenever that weekend. And we have created a media partnership with them.
I love that.
We are very fortunate they have some really influential, high-level people in the fitness space who are going to be at this event. And we're going to do a series of episodes here coming up in the next couple of weeks where we're going to interview a few of the people who will be at that event. And then we're going to go to the event.
Yeah.
And we're going to have an activation there.
Are we going to work out together?
Yeah, we're going to work out. We're going
right.
to go, and we're going to cover all of the different. They have an obstacle course. They're going to have
awesome.
daily ruck marches. They're going to have live fitness events. Savage Race is one of the partners. Rogue Fitness is one of the partners. So there's a lot of people involved in this thing. We're going there with a couple of our partners, 18 Alpha Fitness, one of our sponsors, Kevin Edgerton. He was on episode 40 as well. Kevin and I have known each other for a long time. He'll be coming down. And we're also going to be partnered with a company called the Readiness Collective. And Jesse Levin from the Readiness Collective is an organization that focuses on resiliency and training people for resiliency. And they're coming down, and they have donated, along with Land Rover of Fairfield, Connecticut, have given us a Land Rover that is essentially a World War II Land Rover ambulance. And a podcast studio has been created in the back of it by Factory Underground, where we recorded episodes with Andy Towers, the PLL, last year's Premier Lacrosse League champion. They configured a podcast studio in the back of this thing for 4 mics, and we're going to have an activation there with an on-site podcast studio. And we're going to do it for 3 days. We're going to interview everybody. We're going to talk to people who are attending the event, and then we'll cut a longer episode at the back end that kind of sums it all up. So we got 4 episodes on the lead up.
Cool.
with some super influential people in fitness, and we'll do one on the back end as a roll up.
Should we invite our listeners to join in
Jacksonville?
If anyone's around, come on out.
Please.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's gonna be a lot of fun. And then I've been invited to Podfest, and Podfest is the world's largest podcast conference. I've been invited to speak at Podfest, and that is Memorial Day weekend down in Orlando. So I think we're making a Disney trip out of it with the kids.
Great.
That was
good way to swing that with
I think that was
Very smart.
that was the hook to be able to go. But really fortunate that Podfest had reached out and invited me to come there and speak. And so we're working on the topics, and we're working on what we're going to be presenting there. But great opportunity to get some more visibility on what we're doing. And then we've got more amazing guests. We've got some more athletes coming up. We've got some more business leaders. We've got some organizations that are focused on mental health, which has been a big component and something we've talked about a lot. And so we're really excited. We are booked out to July.
Wow. I mean, it's such an honor for Podfest to ask you to speak within a year of launching. It's really just a testament to what y'all are building here. Okay, so now, as we close out the episode, regular listeners know that the Jedburghs had to do 3 things every day to be successful: shoot, move, and communicate. So I want to know, because I'm sure no one has asked you this question yet, what are your 3 things?
This has become a staple of each one of our episodes. And I believe that I'm going to answer your question, but I'll give you the background first. So habits are something that are common in all high performers.
Yes.
And it can be simple things like waking up early. Travis Holman, from a couple episodes ago, the CEO of Holman Lockers. They build the locker rooms for the NFL and the NBA and Equinox.
Yes.
But he says every successful person he knows wakes up early.
I know.
And so everybody who achieves a lot has a set of daily habits. The Jedburghs, we talk about, their mission in World War II. Jump behind enemy lines, starting on D-Day, and the subsequent nights after, 3-man teams into occupied France, link up with French resistance, arm them, train them, and then conduct sabotage and subversion against the Germans. Well, in order to do that, I throw that out there, and certainly not a simple task, but there are foundational habits that they had to exhibit every day so that their focus could be on the big picture. Their focus could be on actually training these. What missions are we actually going to do? How are we going to strategically affect the German ability to reinforce Normandy? But they couldn't do it if they couldn't shoot, they couldn't move, and they couldn't communicate. Same holds true in special operations today as the lineage has carried forward. So I asked my guests, what are the 3 things that you do? And we have so many cool answers from different folks about, Richard Hanbury talked about how he journals extensively.
Yeah.
Stephen Nyman, 3-time World Cup champion in downhill skiing, multiple-time Olympian, talked about setting deliberate goals, stepping away, and honestly critiquing and assessing himself, and then also asking himself every day, do I want to be here? Is this what I actually want to do? I talked about Travis Holman. He said, show up, never walk alone, focus on the good, learn from the bad. Julia Samrasova episode came out today. She threw a 4th in to me, which was the first time that happened, but I let her do it.
No.
Wake up every day at the same time with gratitude. Never procrastinate. Have a sense of urgency. Schedule time to rest and recover. And then her 4th was fight for what you want. And she called it. She said, I ain't too proud to beg. And I said, let me rephrase that to fight for what you want. But all of these people have these core foundational things. You said, so now I'm turning it back on you.
What did I say?
All right. Yeah. You said journal. You said have coffee, and you said exercise.
Yeah.
And those things, you do those things every day. They're super simple.
Yeah, you can be just like me.
Yeah, but you'd be just like me, and you're ready to go. It's not even cheating. But they're important. And so for me, it's make a prioritized list. Every night before I kind of end my day, which recently has been quite late or early in the morning, I make a prioritized list for the next day. I literally put things down and then I number them.
Yep.
So because I know when I wake up at 4:30 the next morning that it's going to be, I don't know, my head's going to be spinning.
Yes.
And I got to know exactly what I got to knock out in what order. And so I make a prioritized list. The second one is communicate effectively. I think that we talk about communication in a lot of different episodes, and we say Alan Echtenkamp in episode 10 is an organizational psychologist, and he said there's 3 parts to every communication. There's the sender, the receiver, and the message itself. And I think that is a really important concept that effective leaders have to keep in the back of their mind is, how do I actually communicate with people in a way that they're going to receive the message that I'm trying to send? And so I say, you have to communicate effectively. And the third one I say is take deliberate action. In Julia Samrasova's episode, we talked about being busy. And she said, we joked about people use busy now as a badge of honor. Right? They say, and I think I said that I've started to have a visceral reaction when I say, how are you doing? And people say, I'm so busy. But it's, how many times are you busy, but you've achieved nothing? and she asked the question, are you happy? Do you have satisfaction? Are you achieving something by being busy? And so for me, it's about deliberate action. Am I doing something right now that in some way is moving the ball forward? And that can be personally, that can be professionally, but do things with a purpose and do things that are going to achieve an effect. And if you think about those actions, that ties back into your ability to communicate effectively, because we're not, for lack of a better term, talking nonsense.
Yep.
Right? We're talking about meaningful things.
Yes.
Okay. And we're executing on a list.
Yep.
Right? And then those three things are how I try to approach each one of my days.
Have you read Essentialism?
No.
Oh, you really should. Everything you just said, I'm sure folks who listen to this podcast have probably heard of it, and if not, this is like right in your zeitgeist. Essentialism was a very popular book last year, and it talked about how this like, oh, I'm busy, I don't have, time poverty, I don't have enough time to do the things I need to do in a day. This hustle culture, I think we're kind of coming to like a little bit of a crossroads with all of that now, and people are really getting smart about it. Busy for busy's sake is not successful.
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying. Okay. Now regulars of the show know. Every episode, our host and creator, Fran, takes 9 characteristics of elite performance as defined by Special Operation Forces, and you usually assign one to your guest. I have the honor today of assigning one to you. First, I just have to ask you, is there one that you want me to say? I'm not going to defer to you, but
no, I don't.
You don't have a favorite?
No, I remember yours though. Curiosity and integrity.
Well, that's 2.
I gave you 2. You were the first time I ever did that, and I actually said that in the episode.
Really?
I said I've never done this.
Okay.
Even though it was episode 7, so I didn't
I
have that much.
was.
There were a lot of I've never done, but yeah, rarely do I have to. And I think I said I was honest and said I can't decide. I gave you both.
Okay. All right. Well, I wish that you had a favorite. You don't have a favorite?
You need them all. You need them all to be effective. In different degrees.
I want to hear from the listeners on this. Definitely wire us. We want to hear from you on social or email. What is someone has a favorite out there. I certainly do. But for you, I choose drive. And the description of that is growth mindset, be better than yesterday, continuous self-improvement. And I just want to say that you exhibit it to the nth degree, and you're really an inspiration to so many of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And I've had really a pleasure to talk to so many people, and drive is up there. I don't have a favorite, and I wasn't going to give you a favorite, but it is an honor to have drive because I believe that it sets the conditions for everything else. If you don't want to wake up and achieve something, then in a lot of ways the other ones kind of don't matter. If you're happy with where you are and you don't want to push it when you don't have to, right? But that's what sets great organizations and great people apart. So thank you.
I chose well. I knew it. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us and me into your home. I sincerely appreciate you being a part of this podcast, your support from the very beginning, because I know we spoke even before I recorded the first episode. And since our very first conversation, the friendship that we've created is really, really meaningful to me. And we couldn't continue to do this without support from you and our other guests and our sponsors and our listeners. Are so impactful, and that's why we do it. But I thank you, and I look forward to the next year.
Great. Maybe I'll see everyone in Florida.
Yeah, Jacksonville. We'll be there.
Okay, cool. Bye.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other behind-the-scenes content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, Talent War Group, and our sponsor Jersey Mike Subs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast and Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.